All right. I am now joined once again by Derick Varn and Jordan Dubin, who were with us last month, and Deep State Kuba, who was in a undisclosed location last month, but has been cleared for participation in this podcast.
The tests came back negative.
Yeah.
I love that. We'll just leave that open-ended. What could that possibly mean?
Fair enough.
What?
What do you say? Oh, okay. That was interesting.
I said you'll never know.
Yeah. Well, but I'm happy to be back, and I'm looking forward to this little time capsule of a debate that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, so this is from 2011, and from what I can tell about it, I haven't actually sat down and watched the whole thing yet. This is going to be, beginner mind for me today. But this, from what I could tell, I mean, so this is 2011, and it's like, I think it was just, I guess in 2011, this was like just barely not a time capsule yet. Right. Like in other words, it's not like, I feel like even by like 2014 or so, the culture had probably already started to change a little bit. And the sort of moment that Sam Harris represented was starting to end or change, or, I mean, certainly like that kind of original new atheism was starting to fracture a little bit more.
It's before he decided to be IDW light, and before Chris Hedges was annoying. Well, actually, he was annoying then too, but still.
Yeah.
Well, it was also still at the very tail end, where you're living in the post-Bush years, still making sense of Iraq, still coming to terms with the, what happened to the peace dividend, what happened to globalization, how are we coming to terms with the world being, from a mainstream, the Atlantic style perspective, more dangerous and chaotic than we expected. Is it the Muslims' fault? Maybe. But the new thing hadn't happened yet, right? It wouldn't be until 2016 that we enter into that kind of post-Bush era, which in a lot of ways is living out all of the worst predictions, worst possible outcomes from that previous phase, right? We really got unlucky.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, on the face of it, and I have to admit, I know a lot more about Sam Harris than I do about Chris Hedges. I don't know. I think I probably, to be completely honest, might be unfair. Whatever, like 2 or 3 pieces of Chris Hedges commentary I've run into over the years have, have kind of annoyed me enough that I never really bothered to check out his work in any more substantive way than that. But I've been craning my neck at the decades long car crash that is Sam Harris, like since probably Bush was president, certainly early in the time that Obama was.
Chris Harris is one of the few people that have written polemics.
You just combine them.
Chris Harris.
Sam Harris. see, they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, you somehow make them both worse.
Sam Harris and Chris Hedges. But Sam Harris is one of the few people that I wrote polemics against in 2004, 2008, 2011, 2014, and almost did again in 2023. So it's like he's a constant thorn in my side. And in multiple ways, like his politics irk me, his declamations about his politics irk me, his understanding of what science is irks me, His refusal to engage in philosophy and meta-philosophy because it's boring irks me. His constant pontificating about everything irks me. But on the other hand, and I think we have to like look at Hedges too, a product of aughts leftism.
Yeah.
Like most of his Jeremiads where he blamed everything from like porn to how annoying the black bloc was on the Bush administration somehow. Was something that I remember dealing a lot with in 2004 to like 2012 even. And then he's only recently been made somewhat more relevant by his him joining up with like Thomas Frank and the quote left populists, which exist on a spectrum from like him to Cornel West to Jimmy Dore, I guess. And I find his engagements also kind of frustrating because they presume you that you understand his moral worldview and that his moral worldview is somehow objective, which is something both of these people share. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it's ironic because you see the clash between those two incommensurables in this debate. One is grounded in nice guy Christianity, and the other one is grounded in debate bro atheism. So they can't really coexist. But I think you put it very well that the one big problem with Harris is that he doesn't want to do deeper philosophy. He just wants to do debate bro logic. That's a little unfair.
A mindfulness app. Just want to throw that out there. So
he does.
Nothing soothing than listening to Sam Harris talk about imagining that your toes are slowly disintegrating into air.
That was actually in the very first TMBS live show in like January 2019. There was a bit that they were interspersing it with that I think it was just Michael doing all the recordings, but it was like recordings of like inspired by the Sam Harris mindfulness app. It was like the rest of his co-thinkers, like what their mindfulness apps would sound like. So it's like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, like all of them doing guided meditation, Ben Shapiro telling you that, if you hadn't let go of your ego yet, that wasn't his fault. That was your fault. It was all stuff like that.
Amazing. That sounds really good.
It's interesting about Harris because Harris has somehow managed to continuously show up in these coteries of people I find annoying. There's the original Four Horsemen, which we've talked about it. I kind of will defend a little bit Hitchens, and I'll defend a lot Dan Dennett. Mm-hmm. But I always thought Richard Dawkins. Dawkins was just an Anglican prig who just happened not to believe in God.
So that's actually really good. That's about right.
And Harris seemed to really like bombing people. So, and
what were the horsemen of as atheists?
New atheists. I don't know. I'm going to just go ahead and say that Peterson is clearly famine, right? Like with the whole bizarre dieting and raw all meat type thing, and that weird look. The Dawkins is kind of their king, so it makes sense if he's death. Harris clearly is war, of course.
That was good, although you did do the same thing essentially that Varn did earlier and combined, because you made Jordan Peterson retroactively one of the Four Horsemen of New Atheism.
Jordan Peterson, everyone's favorite Christian who can't actually say that he believes in God except in a kind of sort of vaguish way. Who
answers the question, do you believe in God, in like 700 words that don't actually include a yes or a no.
Incidentally, something he has in common with Chris Hedges.
Well, interestingly, we could make a whole case about how Chris Hedges and Jordan Peterson are also two sides of a very annoying coin, but it's a slightly different annoying coin.
Hedges is in so many coins.
Hedges is everywhere. We'll get into this. I think we're gonna find this debate a weird flashback because we gotta. You're right when you talk about this debate as happening in a kind of context of the new atheists were kind of done by 2013. At least there was a political backlash after Dawkins,
like definitely 2016, but yes, I think really a few years before that. Yeah,
Dawkins like by 2010 or 2011 even.
Yeah. I mean, I think to a certain extent. I mean, I think we can say that generally speaking, in the Obama years, even though in some ways the very beginning of the Obama years is when they really came into their own as a group, but there's a sense in which like the fumes were really strong at the beginning of the Obama years, but like insofar as new atheism was always a little bit of a reaction to the George W. Bush version of American conservatism, then like it was already maybe running a little bit on fumes back then. Like I think it was really two things, right? Because I think new atheism to different degrees, like as a political phenomenon, was partly a war on terror phenomenon, although that's also I think varies considerably between the horsemen. Like Sam Harris, I mean, Kuba is clearly right to say that out of the four horsemen, he was clearly war, right? Like that's like he was the most war on terror.
There's a whole section of the End of Faith that literally argues that you can justify both torture and bombing people based off of presumed belief structure.
Yes, awesome.
Like,
very, very healthy stuff. And then Dan Dennett was the least war on terror because it's like, I mean, like honest to God, like I think Dennett just kind of wanted to like talk about religion because like he's a philosophy nerd. And then Hitchens and Dawkins in different ways were in between those two ends, right? I mean, like late Hitchens is obviously a war on terror hawk, but like if you actually read his God is Not Great book, it's, as you've pointed out, Varn, before, is like weirdly not as much of a war on terror book as you would think. And like it's clearly that's in there, but it's like clearly much more of a reaction to Christianity, right? I mean, this is the religion. He even has the joke about like it's he's got the joke he makes in Hitch 22 about how he's a Protestant atheist, because that's the initial religion he didn't believe in. And yeah, I think that like, so to the extent that it's a war on terror phenomenon, as the years pass after Bush, then and like Al-Qaeda style terrorism stops occupying quite so much headspace in people's minds, then yeah, I mean, I think that dissipates a little bit, and to the very considerable extent to which it was a reaction to Bush style conservatism, which I think now a lot of leftists kind of think of it like sort of purely as a war on terror phenomenon because they've decided they don't like it anymore, oftentimes because they used to be it themselves and they're overreacting to it, but like I think that but I think it was like really much more of a phenomenon of blue America. I mean, that was like kind of the culture war at the time, had a lot more to do with religion than the culture war certainly did in the Trump years or since, which is why I think new atheism stopped making sense and people went off in different directions. But
right. I mean, you remember gateway drugs like Atheism Plus, right? Like
I do remember Atheism Plus. That like 6 weeks that was the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the plus there?
Atheism plus
social
leftism,
justice, basically.
Yeah, atheism plus social justice. Woke new atheism, and what happened to most new atheists when people go that like, oh, they became, like reactionaries. Some of them, Pat Condell, Dawkins himself, did become different kinds of reactionaries. Pat Condell got tied up into the what is it, England First Party or whatever, not Brexit Party later. but the vast majority of them just became annoying Democrats, and like, I think that's where the culture moved to. The questions were very different, because one of the things that happened in 2007 to 2012 is that, for reasons that I think actually have some ties to what we might vaguely call political economy, religion got very unpopular amongst younger people, and also harder to maintain. And I don't think it's all just because we became rational. If you've ever been on Twitter, you see that that's not true. But I do think it has to do with the way in which evangelicalism and aggressive foreign policy were tied together in the Bush administration. And by the time you get to 2016, basically the only people who are left in the evangelical camp are like rabid conservatives who'll believe whatever Trump says to stay loyal to the Republican Party, which also indicates that they're a much smaller part of the population than they were even 10, 15 years ago. Whereas Hedges is interesting. I remember one of my many attempts at a polemic against Hedges back when I was still a blogger, when he was complaining about the Black Bloc during Occupy. Now, I don't always love the Black Bloc, but I don't complain about it, because if you complained about everything that you thought was tactically foolish or annoying on the left, you would become a reactionary, because all you do is complain about how much everybody sucks. But Hedges was complaining about that element while also trying to distance himself from the Democrats, while also still trying to stay part of the Democratic coalition. And that is interesting to me, because if you look at the age of a lot of the quote left populist, and I see people in the chat complaining about Jimmy Dore, we can bracket him out for now, to make you guys happy.
No, just forget
the D name.
Forget Chris Hedges. We're not even going to watch the debate. Let's just talk about Jimmy Dore for the next 3 hours.
But it seems like they all tried to stay loyal to the Democrats even during Occupy to some degree until relatively recently.
I mean, so I would say, like, just wrapping up the point about the new atheists, like, I do think that my sense, and it's a little bit hard to tell, right? But I don't think there's like polling on this, for example, right? But my sense was always that, like, probably the majority of, like, your sort of rank and file new atheists, their revulsion with Bush style evangelism was also bound up with their revulsion with Bush style foreign policy. And the fact that some of their heroes were big cheerleaders for that was just kind of there's some cognitive dissonance about that, maybe, right? Or people just kind of, even like thought about it and were like, okay, well, I still like what they say about this. I'm kind of going to ignore that or whatever. But certainly in terms of positioning, I mean, Sam Harris, again, Chris Hedges, I know very little about, can't really comment. I have this like vague memory of him saying something about Rosa Luxemburg that I found annoying, but like, I honestly, that could be wildly unfair because I do not remember why I found it annoying. But Sam Harris, oh no. Yeah. Okay. Well, Jordan was a big fan of that essay about Rosa Luxemburg, so she's just out. That's enough.
Did she self-counsel? Is that what happened?
She okay. All right. She's decided that even though I was shitting on the Rosa Luxemburg essay, she'll still come back.
No more auto cancellation.
But I was gonna say, like Sam Harris, even though I've always hated his politics, oddly enough, almost everything I've written about him has been hasn't really been about politics. It's just been about like philosophy. Right. So I back in 2019, I wrote something for Arc Digital Media called The Problem with Sam Harris's Moral Theory, that was like about his stuff in the moral landscape, about how if you like really understand it, all of his moral views follow from science. And yeah, and then earlier this year, right, wrote something called "Sam Harris Has Nothing Useful to Say About Free Will," right? And in that, I mean, I guess I will say, I mean, the one sort of nice thing I said about him there, as I said, since I'm going to spend the rest of this essay giving him a hard time, I want to take a minute here to say one nice thing about him. Sam Harris may be one of the most consistent, least audience capture people in media, as far as I can tell. His beliefs and sensibilities in 2023 are indistinguishable from what they were when his first book, The End of Faith, came out in 2004. He'll sound off on whatever subjects happen to swim into public consciousness at any given point in time, and cheerfully hang out with whoever agrees with him about that subject, and then part ways when they disagree with him about the next thing. But I see no evidence that he particularly gives a shit what either his collaborators, the moment, or his audience thinks about any of it. He has the worldview of a technocratic centrist sort of West Coast liberal. He reveres science and expertise and distrusts the energies and passions of people who didn't go to college. He votes for Democrats, practices meditation, and takes it for granted that the U.S. military is a force for good in a dangerous world. None of this is even a little bit surprising for a man of his background, education, class position, and cultural context. Honestly, you can't throw an empty Starbucks cup in Santa Monica without hitting somebody who would check every single one of those boxes, which, you know, I think is a description I stand by.
He's a suburb of the Bay personified in many ways. I mean, that's kind of been my take on him, including being, you know, like myself, of a vaguely Jubu background. Although I also think he has Protestant parents. I don't know. His background's actually complicated, but yeah, it's
apparently he's from LA. I'm looking into this now. I always forget that he's a neuroscientist.
Yeah, and I think he's legitly a neuroscientist, obnoxiously. Although he became one after he was famous.
He became famous when he was still in graduate school,
right,
which I think may be the most enervating thing about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was just finishing his master's when The End of Faith was put out.
Well, fun fact, I couldn't find anything about his parents' religion, but just glancing at his Wikipedia page, I always thought he was Jewish, but I guess maybe he's not, or maybe he's part, you know, whatever. There's like maybe it's a mixture. But but one fun thing I did find out is apparently that his mom is a TV writer and producer who created the Golden Girls.
There you go. Well, it appears that his mother is Jewish but not religious. Spivak being the last name. Super important stuff we're talking about here.
Yes, it's a very important
thing. And his father is Quaker.
Okay,
so, that explains everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, how else are you gonna rebel against your Quaker parents other than by coming like out Nixon?
I was just thinking about Nixon. Yeah.
Like that's what you got to do. You got to out Nixon to.
Nixon and Harris are best Quakers.
And I mean, his reasoning style is actually very Protestant. Check that out.
And now I'm just imagining his mother as like B. Arthur, which would be super fun. Love the Golden Girls.
Thank you for being a friend.
Yeah.
So, and I think I'm pretty sure Hedges is a namby-pamby Protestant of some sort. But
yes, Church of England, whether or not he's actually in the Church of England.
Sure. Yeah. Well, fair enough. Anybody have any closing thoughts on our gladiators?
The chat wants us to out ourselves, and I feel like we've been doing enough digging into the particular faith backgrounds of the debate.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Jordan is a Methodist. The Kuba is a Presbyterian. Varn is an Islamic fundamentalist, and I'm a Hindu. Those are the yep.
You are a Sufi. What's going on here?
You could be a Sufi and Islamic fundamentalist, actually. So
okay, there we go.
Yeah.
You're 23 and me. Oh man, that would be amazing.
Blood in Hamas.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the major conventional options besides Protestantism are well represented. But in any case, to go on to the debate, unless you actually want to do that, I think we can skip by most of the.
Well, to give a little bit of context, when I proposed we do something like this, the question that I was interested in wasn't debating religion, right? Whether or not it's true. The question that I find much more interesting is whether or not the secularization hypothesis is correct, meaning that as societies become more developed, as economies become more sophisticated, you have a progressive turn away from old-fashioned style of religion towards what we could call atheism classic, kind of Marxian type of rational metaphysics, materialism, dialectic or not. Which, to be fair, and one reason I think that this group has engaged much more with Harris than with Hedges is that kind of like new atheism is not entirely separable from atheism classic, right? From which has a genealogy that goes back to the Enlightenment and includes Karl Marx and includes
it's in some ways new atheism.
Socialist.
Like the new thing is now without the Marxism.
Yeah, I was about to say the new part of it is like when we recount the Enlightenment, we're going to skip all the German idealist and Marxist stuff. Thank you very much. Like new atheism to me, I always like to call it Anglo-pilled atheism.
Atheism with American characteristics.
Yeah. Just pretty funny and pretty apt, even though half of the Four Horsemen are Brits. But yeah, it's still. I think there's a reason why it hit so much more here than there. I was wondering also as you said that, right, whether it's like okay, like a third. I mean, there are lots more than three options, but like a third option besides like yes, what you just said will happen, and no, it won't. Right? Is or like no it won't in the sense that there's like no sort of drift towards greater secularization, is that there is maybe like a sort of tendency in modern cosmopolitan high-tech societies with religious freedom to drift towards a certain kind of secularization, although not one that necessarily has very much to do with that sort of rationalistic metaphysics, right? I mean, like in some ways, this is kind of the Matt Christman thesis about how everybody in America, including the Catholics, are actually Protestants because, like, nobody, people, the sort of stuff that he the sort of thing that he's gesturing at when he says that is it's like everybody sort of feels free to kind of make it up a la carte.
Well, yes, and when you look at the rise of the so-called nuns, it's not that these are Sam Harris style new atheists or Marxian old atheists or anything else that comes out of that rationalist lineage, but you have a lot of yoga and wellness moms that don't like to go to church.
Which is also an interesting division within the New Atheists, that like Hitchens includes a very short chapter in his book that's like the Eastern religions were also bad. Although it's called like No Eastern Solution or something like that. But it's like, it's very short. It's very superficial. I mean, it's pretty obvious that like, having spent his entire life thinking about his objections to Abrahamic religions and particularly Christianity, like it could not be more obvious. It's an afterthought right in that book, right? He just kind of wants to be complete. Whereas Harris is,
secular Buddhist, or at least he was in the aughts. I think he may give that up in the aught teens. He also, until very recently, was willing to cozy up with secularized Christianity, a la the IDW. I think that Harris actually, one of the things that's interesting about new atheism, as we get into this on the secularization thesis, is new atheists actually kind of rejected the secularization thesis sometimes. Not all of them did, but some of them did. That's why they thought the battle against religion, and so not the four horsemen, but people like P.Z. Myers, who later would radically move away from this position, would even talk about no accommodation to religion whatsoever, including in metaphors like just liberal religious people, etc. And the other thing that we see with, and we saw this in Europe too before we saw it in America. Europe is broadly speaking loosey-goosey secular, but it's not like you can't find horoscopes in Germany. And it's also a number of epistemologies that are not Enlightenment rationalism in the religious category and relationships to and the non-religious category, and relationships to science are pretty highly varied. In the aughts, there were studies on religious literacy and belief in science between religious literacy, scientific literacy, and belief in science between Europe and the United States. Religious literacy was higher in the United States, but not by much. Apparently, no one knows a goddamn thing about religion, including most people who believe in it.
What a shock.
But the thing about belief in science was interesting. Belief in science tracks like you'd expect. Europe was higher than the United States. But on scientific knowledge, the U.S. actually did better. Which indicated that a lot of the people who knew the science just didn't believe it. It wasn't a question of knowledge. And that started getting me thinking about the assumption in the secularization thesis that secularization actually leads to a kind of rationalism or materialism. And that, so there's two questions there. Does organized religion decline? Right. And is what replaces it actually more rational, whatever the fuck we mean by rational?
And that's one development that, for me, this might be entirely anecdotal. I do not rise to the Sam Harris standard of evidence with this claim, but I'm only offering an observation. It feels as though one thing that replaced new atheism in terms of online discussions of religion has actually been renewed interest among both religiously affiliated people and nuns in the occult, right? You have Rod Dreher types obsessing about the sort of nexus between demonic spirits and the LGBT, Q plus movement. And similarly, you have groups like the pagan internet club that put a curse on Trump at the beginning of his term.
You mean the Facebook witches coven?
That's the one. Yes. The fact that, witches I'm adjusting to a world in which witches covens openly operate. Perhaps I'm aging myself a little with that statement, but these things feel new, and they also feel like a direct refutation of the secularization hypothesis.
Kuba's never been to the Verso Loft, is what he's trying to say.
Well, as somebody who actually has been to the Verso Loft a couple times, I can't comment on that. But but yeah, and then you have people like James Lindsay, who in some fascinating way I don't understand, I think is really into the all of the leftism is literally demonic and stuff like that. But I'm not quite clear that he believes in God.
he
Very
wrote a whole
confused by that.
book with Boghossian about how to create atheists, and lately he's been on the like actually late Dawkins that, oh well, you guys might mitch the Anglican Church, again proving my original thesis that Dawkins was always just an Anglican who didn't believe in God. But Lindsay's weird in that he's picked up the Eric Vogelin thesis that like leftism is imitating the eschaton by trying to make Gnosticism material, which, you know, passed in the 1950s as an intelligent critique of Marxism. We're not going to talk about the 1950s much, but that seems to be as understood through YouTube IDW idiots, because I doubt that he understands Vogelin or von Kuhnlin either. Where this is coming from, like, so like when you read anti-communist stuff from the 40s and 50s, which I have done, so you don't have to, you see some of these things coming up, but those people were believers. Like, they were Catholics. They were like a weird subgrade of Catholic intellectual, mostly with ties to Germany or Kuba's ancestral homeland. And somehow that's gotten filtered into a lot of these former new atheists himself. Because Lindsay was a new atheist when I first encountered him. He was annoying, but that's where he was from. And you've seen this turn in a lot of the Michael Shermer crew too. I was just looking at Skeptic Magazine, which in the aughts was my favorite of the rationalist magazines, because it was softer in its new atheist claims, like complaining about wokeness and council culture and how to fight it. That was their last issue. So we definitely see that something happened in that grouping that's made them also more, you know, they don't believe in God either, but they somehow want to protect something like traditional Christianity, which does lead you to think that, at least for a certain subset of new atheists, what was motivating this was kind of an ethnic chauvinism. Like,
yeah. I mean, I think maybe a combination, right? Because it's like, I think that, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Because it's like, yeah, I think that one of the motivating forces was definitely like, okay, so I've been actually very slowly, when I can, like, you know, when I can take in a little bit and keep it down, I've actually been going back through some like very early Sam Harris, because I was thinking about writing about it. And there's this thing in the End of Faith about like him and his then fiance visiting Paris, and like it's just this like side detail in the story that they were all concerned about having a hotel that's too close to the American embassy because, like, you know, Al Qaeda would bomb it, right? Like that they're just very you know, they like, you know, I mean, whether you want to like, I think that like exaggerated fears about Muslim terrorism are definitely in the mix, right? You know, and in some cases, you know, like I'm thinking like somebody like Bill Maher, who is definitely like a new atheism hanger on, right? You know, that like get mixed up with you know, with like anti-Muslim immigrant sentiments, right? You know, that like the Bill Maher thing about like how it's okay to be concerned that the most common name for babies in London or whatever is Mohammed, you know, stuff like that, right?
Not in London.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, it's like there's so much of new atheism that was like, you know, that was like about people's like relationship with like their own evangelical families, right? You know, that's like that was so much of it. But
Protestants, not even once. All right, let's go.
yeah. We should actually start this up.
We're going to begin with you, Sam Harris, and I'm not going to ring a bell or anything. Just do your spiel, and then he'll do his, and we'll mix it up. Take a few questions, and
Great. Well, thank you, Robert. I think I'm bound to offend somebody in this room because we're living in a country where 90% of people claim to believe in a biblical God. I just want to assure you up front that I'm not being deliberately provocative. The point is not to offend you. And it's certainly not the point of my books. I'm just extremely worried about the role that religion is playing in our world. I happen to think faith-based religion is the most divisive and dangerous ideology we have ever concocted. It keeps me awake at night. Now, as someone who has been doing this for a while, ever since September 11th, ever since those 19 guys showed our pious nation just how socially beneficial religious certainty can be, I have argued against the role that religion is playing in our societies. And I've come to see that really there are only 3 ways of rising to the defense of God. There are not 100 ways of doing this. Either a person argues that a specific religion is true, or he argues that religion in general is useful, and so useful that it may be necessary. Or he attacks atheism essentially as another religion, as being dogmatic, intolerant, irrational, or otherwise worthy of contempt. And so I want to separate these 3 modes of defending religion, because any conversation between a believer and a non-believer tends to find one of these ruts. First, let's start with this claim that any one of our religions is true. There are at least 2 problems with taking this path. The first is they can't all be true. I mean, this is something that Bertrand Russell pointed out 100 years ago. Even if we knew that one of our religions was perfectly true, I mean, even if we knew this was God's multiple choice exam, is it A, Judaism, B, Christianity, C, Islam? Even if we knew one was perfect, given the bewildering profusion of doctrines on offer, and given their mutual incompatibility, every believer should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability. Now it seems to me this should give religious people pause when they espouse their certainties. It never does, but it should. But the deeper problem with arguing for the truth of any religion is that the evidence for our religions is either non-existent or terrible. And this subsumes all claims about the existence of a personal God, the divine origin of certain books, the virgin birth of certain people, the veracity of ancient miracles. I mean, take Christianity as an example. Christianity is founded on the claim that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. There are certain Christians that may want to hedge their bet here, but most Christians, most of the time, take some complement of these miracles as true. And most important, it seems to be the resurrection. Now, the problem with this is that the only thing that testifies to these miracles ever having occurred is the gospel. There's no extra biblical description of these events. Everyone agrees that the gospels were written decades after the events they report, the earliest gospels. The problem is that even if the evidence were much better than that, even if we had hundreds of contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of these miracles, that would still not be good enough evidence to cash out the claims of Christianity. Why not? Well, the problem is that in the 21st century, reports of miracles are still quite common. I have met literally hundreds of Western-educated men and women who think that their favorite Hindu or Buddhist guru has magic powers. I mean, these are the reports of miracles are quite current. There are Hindu yogis and mystics who reportedly walk on water and raise the dead and fly without the aid of technology and read minds and divine the future. You take someone like Satya Sai Baba, the South Indian guru. All of these miracles are attributed to him. He even claims to have been born of a virgin, which incidentally is not such a rare claim in the history of religion or in history generally. Genghis Khan was supposedly born of a virgin. Alexander the Great was born of a virgin. I mean, parthenogenesis does not guarantee that you're going to turn the other cheek, apparently. So consider this. Satya Sai Baba has these miracles attributed to him by literally thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses. He is not the David Koresh of Hinduism. His devotees threw a birthday party for him a few years ago, and 1 million people showed up. There are millions of people who believe he is a living God. Now, so consider, as though for the first time, the foundational claim of Christianity. The claim is that miracle stories of a sort that surround a person like Satya Sai Baba today, and which are compelling to no one apart from his devotees, suddenly become especially credible if you place them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence. So Satya Sai Baba's miracles don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. And yet, place these miracles in an ancient text, and half the people on this earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that? All right, so let's leave aside questions of religion's truth. The second way of arguing in defense of God is to say that religion is useful, and so useful that it may be necessary. And the most common way of arguing for its usefulness is to say that it makes people moral, it consoles them, it gives their lives meaning. There are several problems with this line of argument. The first is, as a defense of God's existence, it is a total non sequitur. I mean, the usefulness of religion does not give you the slightest reason to believe that God actually exists. Every religion could function like a placebo. It could be totally barren of real content, and yet extremely useful in certain circumstances. Let's say that the cosmologists and the physicists came forward and said, sorry for the misunderstanding. It turns out there is a God, and he does have a plan for you. Let's say that happened. The fact that this idea would be consoling wouldn't provide an additional reason to believe it. I mean, if we have conquered any ground at all in the career of our rationality, it's on this distinction that there is a world of difference between wanting to believe something and having good reasons for believing it. And this is why we have phrases like wishful thinking and experimenter bias. This is why scientists do double-blind controlled studies whenever they can and submit their data for peer review. So that's the crucial piece. When you hear someone arguing for the link between morality and religion, or the fact that it gives people meaning in their lives, this is an argument about the usefulness, and this is not an argument for the plausibility of any specific religious doctrine. The other problem with arguing for the usefulness of religion is that the dangers of religion are testified to now on a daily basis by bomb blasts. I mean, how useful is it that millions of Muslims in this world believe in the metaphysics of martyrdom? How useful is it that the Shia and the Sunni in Iraq have such heartfelt religious differences? How useful is it that so many Jewish settlers think that the creator of the universe promised them a patch of desert on the Mediterranean? How useful has Christianity's anxiety about sex been these last 70 generations? Jews, Christians, and Muslims claim that their holy books are so profound, so prescient of humanity's needs, that they could only have been written under the direction of an omniscient deity. An atheist is simply someone who has considered this claim, read the books, and found the claim to be ridiculous. There is nothing that needs to be presupposed on insufficient evidence in order to reject the biblical God. I mean, what dogma have we all embraced to not take Zeus and Poseidon and Apollo into account on a daily basis? But what dogma have we used to reject all of the thousands of dead gods who now lie buried in that mass grave we call mythology? Would it be dogmatic to doubt that the Iliad or the Odyssey was written by the creator of the universe? This is not dogmatism. As Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That is all you need for atheism. That if ever there were an antidote to dogmatism, that's it. There's a related claim, the idea that atheism is arrogant, and science generally is arrogant in its dismissal of religion. This is really ironic. It's this claim reverberates ceaselessly in the echo chamber of American religious discourse. But it is a profound irony to see religious people praising themselves for their humility while essentially making claims about cosmology and physics and astronomy and geology and biology and paleontology and just dozens of specific sciences that no scientist could make. I mean, every religious person who takes the Genesis account of creation, say, seriously, 53% of Americans seemingly take it literally, but just even dignifying it as informative. Any person who's doing this is essentially saying to somebody like Stephen Hawking, Stephen, you're a smart guy. I see you got a lot of equations over there, but you essentially don't know enough about cosmology, because here, God did this in 6 days and then he rested on the seventh. And, I don't really, that could be a metaphor, but I don't see you really grappling with the nuances here. And they're essentially saying to someone like Richard Dawkins or Robert Trivers or any evolutionary biologist, they're saying, you're saying all this stuff about DNA and the fossil record and radiocarbon dating, but it says here that man was made in a separate act of creation, and that really we should ponder over that. And this would be amusing, this kind of covert arrogance, if it were not having such a disastrous effect, if it were not impeding the teaching of science in this country. 30% of biology teachers don't even mention evolution because it is such a hassle to deal with the religious lunacy of their students and their parents. This really is impeding medical research. It really is eroding the prestige of the United States in the eyes of the rest of the world. You saw this recent Republican debate. When asked, how many of you reject evolution? 3 arms go up. This is flabbergasting. These people are seeking the highest not only the highest office in the land, they're seeking more power and responsibility than any person has had in human history. So to wrap up, let me just say that none of what I've just said should be construed as a denial of the importance of ethics in our lives, or even the importance of spiritual experience. You can be someone who's deeply committed to transforming your moment-to-moment perception of the world and use techniques like meditation and fasting, and you can go into a cave for a year and be a mystic if you want to. None of that requires presupposing anything on insufficient evidence, and none of that requires that we lie to ourselves or to our children about our state of knowledge about the world. And the problem I have with religion, both at every point on the spectrum, from moderate to extreme, is that it stands as a permanent denial of the possibility of developing a truly rational, modern, open-ended discussion about the nature of our subjectivity, about the possibility of ethics and spirituality truly in conformity with our rationality as it exists now. Every religious person, every person who's committed to still being a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist is essentially giving tacit endorsement to the religious divisions in our world, and essentially saying that we need some measure of mythology, we need some measure of fairy tale, we need to pretend on some occasions that we know things we do not know. And it's simply untrue. So I think that's probably enough to get us started. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot here that like I think it's actually not entirely irrelevant to the sort of original thing that Kuba was thinking about when he got us on this, but like, you know, it's a little bit of a side thing, but it's not entirely irrelevant that like gets down, you know, that I think reinforces my frustration with these guys, which is just like, look, in a certain sense, I don't object to the project of debate bro atheism. I just want it to be better than this, right? Like you know, that I think there are a lot of pretty important distinctions that are being run roughshod over here. And it's like, I think that, you know, yeah, I don't know. I want people to do it in a sort of philosophically better way than this if they're going to do it. But I have more specific thoughts, but I want to turn the floor over to you guys.
I don't want to dig too deeply into Harris's initial statement because, like you, I'm not averse to pushing back against a certain kind of literalist religious dogmatism, and I'm in favor of people adopting more scientific and rational frameworks for understanding the world. That's so it's hard for me to take too strong a position against Harris. At the same time, he makes a number of like you said, he runs roughshods over many distinctions that are significant. He takes a kind of fundamentalist view of what religion must be. And for a scientist, and for someone who likes to cite Pew polls as evidence, he doesn't have a real appreciation for the substance of how people believe what they say they believe, or how religious affiliation works. Many people are just intellectually inconsistent, and to treat them as doctrinal Sharia bots or Torah golems, that's not most Muslims. That's not most Jews. That's most people are bundles of contradictions. How many Marxists?
You gotta do the Christians.
I got to do the Christians.
The Torah golems. What are the Christians?
I'll say Jesus ants.
Jesus ants. Okay, nice. Yeah, but I mean, to your point, I mean, this is the thing. So, I mean, I kind of said almost everything I've written about Harris has been about philosophy more than about politics. I mean, the only real partial exception that, at least had a hand in helping to write, is the long Harris chapter in Against the Web. And one of the points that we were making in there is that the sort of weird essentialism that Harris and his co-thinkers have about religion in general, where you sort of seem to think that liberal religion isn't real religion, right? It's like liberal Islam isn't real Islam, liberal Christianity isn't real Christianity, and it's like, well, hold on, now there's a real version. How does that work, right? Like if it's not
the
given
really fake one.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
That.
Yeah, if this isn't given to us by God, then it seems like, well, you just have a sort of vast cultural tradition with many different threads that are developed in many ways by many different people, and nothing would make any of them any more real than any of the other ones.
Well, it's interesting. I'm seeing people in the chat actually pick up Harris's talking points about people not being in the Middle Eastern world, which just want to say that I've definitely known liberal Muslims. I've even known fairly liberal quietist Salafist because I lived in the Middle East for a fairly long time. But I'm going to actually turn back to what Harris actually said, because Harris, to me, I once claimed that Stanford should give his neuroscience degree back, should take his neuroscience degree away because I don't actually see any evidence that he studied it in the way he talks. And I also want to point out this is a man who argued in straight face to a group of philosophers that meta ethics was not necessary because it was
boring. I mean, that's essentially his argument, right?
Right. But that you could prove that ethics was objective because of medicine. And I was like, well, you can't even prove medicine's objective, motherfucker. So I want to point out some prepositions here that you have to deal with when he talks about reason. He never defines what reason is. This has actually been a problem with me from moment one with the New Atheist. The only person who kind of does is the one that I like, didn't. And even then, I find it somewhat insufficient that he doesn't separate kinds of reason, which historically people in philosophical traditions do. I mean, there's a reason why Aristotle breaks it down in like phronesis, techne, poiesis, praxis, etc. as kinds of reasons. There's like 8. So when they say rational, they usually mean things like me too. He doesn't define religion either, nor its clear deviations of variance.
Utility?
Yeah. He doesn't.
Yeah.
None of this is defined.
Notice that he kind of wants to have it both ways in utility too,
Yep.
right? Because he wants to say, look, all we should be talking about is what's objectively true in the world. By the way, I like that. I wish he'd stuck with that. And then on the other hand, he does seem to be making utility-based arguments against religious belief.
Yeah. It's I think the other thing that we get into with people who study the history and development of religion will tell you that for the most part, it is very hard to define religion that does not assume Christian belief structures as the basis of what religion is.
Yeah.
It's like the point I've seen Sam Hasselby make that it's kind of funny the way that like so many sociologists even will like always like the term they always use to describe religion is faiths, which is like that's not just Christian, that's Protestant. I mean,
it's specifically it's not even like it's like, oh, they're all Abrahamic. No, it's not all Abrahamic. It's a very specific sort of post William James framework, actually. So it's a very specific, even kind of American Protestant pragmatism that takes religions as faith-based belief systems and assumes that most people in religions actually share ontologies, epistemologies, etc., which in many religions, including the ones where he was complaining about people believing in miracles from, and I want to get back into that little bit of Orientalism, they don't share that. Like, if you understand the history of, like, say, Buddhism or Hinduism as broad-based concepts, there's not even an agreement on what reality is within those traditions. Like, whether or not there's a distinction between the spiritual and the physical is contested within those traditions, totally within their traditions, and he doesn't deal with that. Now, I know he's a meditator and should know better, but apparently Harris didn't pay attention there either. And for those of you who go, Varn's not being fair, I don't have to. The other thing that I sort of noticed is there's a huge bait and switch in terms of examples. Everything he cites as what religion is almost straight up evangelical Christianity, read then upon Muslims and Jews. Then he goes for examples of people believing in irrational miracles, people believing in gods, and he alternates between first century Roman Empire, which, by the way, he completely misrepresents the various epistemological systems of that time period, and like guru devotees, and he also throws in Buddhist, and I suppose what he means is Tibetan Buddhists who supposedly develop powers, and as opposed to, say, the kind of post 19th century Theravada Buddhism that he would sometimes defend. But again, even in those traditions, those kinds of claims are debated within the tradition itself. Yes, people believe irrational bullshit, but as we were talking about in the beginning, again, also, we haven't really defined what rationality is here ourselves. But what we were talking about in the beginning is like secular people believe all kinds of irrational bullshit. Like, there's all kinds of things people believe, and a neuroscientist in particular should be thinking about the structures that would make people given to those kinds of beliefs, pareidolia, etc. The fact that you cannot speak without metaphysical metaphors, it's literally embedded in the way you communicate, that he just doesn't deal with. But it sounds,
well, I think that maybe one way of understanding Harris is, and I think it's telling that when he lays out the 3 arguments for religion, he spends so much time on the second one.
Remind me, which is, I might be getting the order.
The first argument was that religions are, religious beliefs are true, right? It's the second is that perhaps they are not true, but they are useful. And therefore should be encouraged. And the third is like a tu quoque, where no, you atheists are just like the religious belief systems that you push against, right? You have your own dogmas and your own intolerance. And that third argument, he basically leaves alone entirely. While I think that in the limitations that we've all sort of identified in Harris's take, we see that he's operating within a framework that he just wants to impose by default of a certain kind of, the chat has called it scientism. I don't know if I love that term, but a kind of pared down, operationalized, common sense rationalism in quotation marks, which is downstream from a whole bunch of metaphysical questions that he refuses to engage with.
Yeah, I mean, to that point about refusing to engage,
and he's actually an apologist for a worldview as narrow as that of Quranic or biblical literalists. He has a natural affinity towards those his counterparts.
Varn just said he doesn't have to be fair, but just to show that he was actually being fair about the characterization of Harris on metaethics, I actually did find that quote from The Moral Landscape. So this is the footnote number 1 to the first chapter, right? Moral Truth. He says, many of my critics fault me for not engaging more directly with the academic literature and moral philosophy. There are 2 reasons why I haven't done this. First, while I've read a fair amount of this literature, citation needed, I did not arrive at my position on the relationship between human values and human knowledge by reading the work of moral philosophers. Believe that. I came to it by considering the logical implications of our making continued progress in the science of the mind. Second, I am convinced that every appearance of terms like metaethics, deontology, non-cognitivism, anti-realism, emotivism, etc., directly increases the amount of boredom in the universe.
Wow. Amazing.
I'm not going to engage with the literature where people have actually spent a lot of time thinking about and making arguments about the subjects that I'm broaching here because I find it boring.
I love that too, because it's so directly tied into what he's writing about, where you're just admitting that there's like this whole area that you're not really touching, but also doesn't really interest you. But also read my book. It's full of insights,
But my book about the area which I'm not really touching because I want to claim that, I mean, if you read the Moral Landscape, he later wants to create morality is objective by an analogy to the fact that there's fuzziness in the objectivity in medicine. That's his argument. All right. Now it's not relevant here, but it's an argument based on a series of metaphors and fuzzy definitions. And then when he meets definitions from people he doesn't want to deal with, he just writes it off as boring, as if that is an argument. And he does this on other things too. He does this when people used to ask him, what is reason? This led to an interesting debate in the quote rationalist community around this time that we're talking about here, where Massimo Pagliucci kind of turned against him and eventually turned against New Atheism, and later on just became a weird Stoic. Because he was like, they're not defining what reason means, and they're not defining what science means. They're pretending like the demarcation question doesn't exist. And that it's transparently obvious what is pseudoscience and what is quasi-science and what is science. And Pagliucci, partially in responding to Harris even, went on to try to come up with a system to do that, and then basically gave it up and just started getting really interested in Stoicism. So it's not because he believes in like the objective materialist reality of Zeus, which is actually required of you in ancient Stoicism, for those of you who don't know.
It's really fun to imagine worst case scenarios all the time.
But it's still, this led to a kind of aporia in the community that Harris was engaged in, and instead of actually responding to that aporia, he moved on to a different community that I find even worse. So and what I find interesting about this is I can't tell, we were talking about this in terms of secularization, but it makes it very hard to know what's even at stake here when he's just throwing around like dogma all the time. Well, what's a dogma? For example, is it a dogma to believe without physical evidence, because physical evidence for this literally is not possible, that science is a universal communicative language because of quanta? That's actually not something you can justify empirically or even by the scientific method. There's no way to do it. It is a metaphysical assumption, one that a lot of people, when they communicate about math, will either assume a kind of quantitative Platonism, or they will assume that it models a deep underlying structure of reality, or they will assume that, or conversely, they'll assume that math is just a language and then it has no ontological basis. But you can't prove any of this. There's no way with a scientific methodology to prove any of that. What should you believe? And you have to make a stake in some of these things to make some of these claims that Harris makes. These are not things where you can necessarily be neutral, or to which there is only one answer. And when we talk about things like, this is a socialist channel, so we talk about Marxist materialism or not, but materialism for Marx doesn't mean what materialism means for Harris, because Marx also believes that social relations and human groupings, because they shape the way we interact with the world, are part of the material input. All right. It doesn't mean like we're only a collection of Newtonian atoms for Marx. In fact, Marx makes that very clear. And Marx derived that position actually from a Hegelian reading of Epicurus, and then engaging with the science that existed in his time.
Dissertation.
Right.
I mean, I think that, what the relationship is between like what Marxists mean by materialism and like metaphysical materialism is an interesting question. It's not clear to me that you have to, even though Marx and Engels, certainly Marx, maybe not very late Engels, but whatever, even though those guys are definitely materialists in a certain metaphysical sense also, and that's even important to them, it doesn't necessarily seem like you have to be a materialist in that sense to be like a, historical materialist. But I do just want to say on the question that you're raising about the relationship between sort of, scientific proof and metaphysics. I do think, we might have disagreements about this. I do think that there are like, sort of plausible solutions to that, but I also think that those plausible solutions are largely unavailable to Harris and people who think about this stuff in this new atheist kind of way. What I mean is like, I mean, that there's a kind of like Quinean sort of way of thinking about this that is essentially you think, okay, well, look, what's going on with what's going on with like scientific theory selection is always something kind of inference to the best explanation. You always have multiple theories that are consistent with all of the empirical evidence. So the question is always like, what's the best fit in some sense, not what's the like one thing that the evidence shows. And so maybe you can use that to navigate the more abstract metaphysical questions. I think that's generally not available to people like Harris and you got a little bit of this in that breakdown that Kuba just did of the 3 arguments for religion that Harris takes himself to be responding to. Number 3, the tu quoque, that Harris's response to that, more or less, it was a little bit unclear, but it seemed to be mostly the standard new atheist response, which is to say, no, we're not asserting anything. Right. I mean, this is what these guys always do, that they say, we're just denying what you're saying. We're not making any sort of assertions, or maybe we're even just sort of like unconvinced by what you're saying, which is a different thing. Right. But I mean, it's a very small point in a certain way, but in a certain way it's not, right? That like, this is one of my biggest frustrations with new atheism is this denial that atheism counts as a belief. Of course it's a belief, right? That if you say there is no God, right, you have asserted something that could be false, right? That you've asserted an important and significant thing about reality. And yes, same thing for Zeus and Poseidon. That's that you are asserting something when you say there's no Zeus, Mount Olympus is empty, that like, of course you're asserting something. And like, this is why they even do these weird things, like often like saying, oh, there is actually no, there's no different, like, they sort of deny the traditional distinction between atheism and agnosticism and just say that like atheism is the absence of belief in gods. But of course, it's very, very clear if you listen to them for 10 seconds, they don't just have an absence of a belief. I mean, my miniature schnauzer has an absence of belief in gods, right? She's not an atheist. There's somebody who's actually an agnostic has a absence of belief. Somebody who's just, never thought about it has an absence of belief. What they have is very clearly an act of rejection. They assert the negation. I mean, the same people who will do this, like, oh, atheism is an absence of belief thing, will also like refer to like God as like invisible sky daddy and things like that. That like,
it's like Hitchens. God is not great.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, they clearly are actively asserting that there is no such thing.
That's actually like a very sort of Jewish rabbinical take on talking about God. You can only speak in negatives, what God is not.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
It's impossible to, define. So that's pretty funny in and of itself. But
there's a whole strain in Christianity too, the via negativa, that you can only do that. But yeah, you were saying, Jordan, I'm sorry.
No, I just like what you're saying about making this sort of assertion. It's not just a lack of belief, but something beyond that. It touches on to one of the final brilliant little pearls of wisdom that he dropped on us there before the end, which was that, if you choose and call yourself a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever the examples that he gave were, then you're giving some sort of tacit acceptance of the divisions that we place between ourselves. But like, why does it end with religious divisions? There are so many different ways. What you decide something, this is my opinion, this is my stance, this is my lack of stance. You are engaging in differentiation between yourself and others. And I understand that the size of the thing is religious distinctions and what that's led to and all of that. But like, at the same time, let's talk about other distinctions between people. If we're going to talk about material ones, they probably matter a hell of a lot more than ideological ones. I don't know, but I don't think that we're going to get anything of that sort of.
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Sam Harris.
No, I don't think so. I mean, just to, the point that ultimately annoys me about this is just like, I think that a lot of this stuff is because people want to talk about this issue, but they don't want to actually, I think it's a certain kind of evasion of philosophy. They don't want to actually like have to dig into the arguments. So they'll say, oh, I reject belief in God because there's no evidence. And, but then like on investigation, often what they mean by evidence is incredibly narrow, right? Like it's not, that they, because it's like not like what like the last couple thousand years of Christian history, longer, for certain other religions, that there's a like nobody's come up with any arguments, right, for answering this question in the affirmative that like you would then have to deal with and argue and like respond to, right? It's like, well
again, to go back to the observation that he has a very Protestant way of thinking and a very American Protestant way at that. If you replace God with Steve or any other definite pronoun or definite noun, then proper noun, then you
yes,
it becomes clear that the only way that he can think of God is as a personalized creator legislator that is
and book writer.
A book writer. Exactly. And indeed, he's just jealous, right? He sees God as a rival in the publishing business, right? The Bible just moves so much more than the end of faith, even now. But if there's a more ambiguous or amorphous idea of spirituality, spiritual existence, divinity, then it's like the one chapter that he has on Eastern religion and the unwillingness to talk about things he finds boring. He just has no response. It can only be Odin or Jesus or some dude named Allah.
Well, one of the things he was talking about when he was bringing up like Hindu religious gurus, for example, and he was mentioning that the guru is worshipped literally as a god, and I'm like, well, but literally everybody and in Hinduism is a fragment of Atman, so they're all gods, and that doesn't it just doesn't mean what you're complaining it to mean. Now, a lot of people in that crowd probably do believe it in the way Harris is describing. I'm not going to say they don't, but the actual philosophical basis for that claim it doesn't mean the same thing that it would mean to a Christian or to a first century Roman, whatever he thinks that means. And I found it interesting, like when he was talking about atheism, and he was mentioning like Buddhist gurus who believe in miracles. Well, do Buddhists believe in God? Are gods even? Like if you ask a traditional Buddhist about the existence of gods, they're going to probably not answer the question. Definitely, because if they have any idea where you're coming from about it, they do not believe in a creator God, and they do not believe in an omnipresent God.
right.
It sounds, you make them sound like they're going to answer it like Jordan Peterson.
They actually might, to be completely fair.
Some of them would. Some of them would. I mean, there are definitely theistic Buddhists, but yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's I mean, there is also this whole other issue about what we mean by religion, right? If there's that, because if religion just sort of means like non-scientifically respectable beliefs or something like that, that of a certain flavor, I don't know, that which is sort of how he seems to be using it here, then I mean he's really wandering into the danger zone, because Harris himself, right, is not unfriendly to certain kinds of spiritual belief. I mean, even
flirted with reincarnation early on.
Yeah, exactly, right. Out of body stuff, whatever. So
and didn't he say that you could be like a mystic without having to have any belief?
Yeah, this was one of the things that
Fasting?
distinguishes him, from the other new atheists, is they all thought that was silly, and he was one of these people like, no, we don't have to believe in dogmas, and also, we can judge people by the content of their professed belief structures by our readings of it, but you can be a secular mystic who's completely rational and an atheist.
Like me. Yeah, fair. All right.
Yeah. All right. We should really plunge onward. I don't know.
I
Yeah.
hear that Colonel
shit
Sanders
about-
is chatty as well, so
Yeah.
I might have to.
We haven't even talked shit about Hedges yet, so we got to get there.
Yeah. Got to do some Hedges in the main show. So, yep. Let's do it.
My critique of Sam and his book, I want to say that we do share one, very important belief, and that is that both of us feel that it's time to stop tolerating the intolerant, and that societies that tolerate the intolerant
Are too tolerant.
that eventually both the tolerant disappear and tolerance along with them. And so I do laud Sam for his courage. And as you heard that Bob said, I just wrote a book on the Christian right called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War in America. So on that, I laud Sam for standing up. But I don't, I come from a religious background. I guess in some vague way, I still consider myself religious. And I think Sam, in my mind, has conflated faith, which I hold of some importance, with tribalism. I think his book is an attack not so much on faith, but on a system of being and believing that is dangerous and is compatible with the open society. But what he attacks is superstition, a belief in magic, the childish notion of an anthropomorphic God that is characteristic of the tribe, of the closed society. And he calls this religion, and I do not. I think what Sam, in my mind, fails to grasp is not simply the meaning of faith, something that I'll address a little later on, but the supreme importance of the monotheistic traditions in creating the concept of the individual. This individualism, the belief that we can exist as distinct beings from the tribe or the crowd, and that we are called on as individuals to make moral decisions that at times defy the clamor of the tribe or the nation, is a gift of the Abrahamic faiths. This sense of individual responsibility is coupled with the constant injunctions in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity for a deep altruism. And this laid the foundations for the open society. This individualism is the central doctrine and most important contribution of monotheism. We are enjoined, after all, to love our neighbor, not our tribe. This empowerment of individual conscience is the starting point of the great ethical systems of our civilization. The prophets, and here I would include Jesus, helped institutionalize dissent and criticism. They initiated the separation of powers. They reminded us that that culture and society was not the sole prerogative of the powerful, that freedom, and indeed the religious life, required us to often oppose and defy those in authority. God, as Sam points out, is a human concept. God is the name we give to our belief that life has meaning, one that transcends the world's chaos, randomness, and cruelty. To me, to argue about whether God exists or does not exist is futile. The question is not whether God exists. The question is whether we concern ourselves with or are utterly indifferent to the sanctity and ultimate transcendence of human existence. God is that mysterious force, and you can give it many names, as many religions do, which works upon us and through us to seek and achieve truth, beauty, and goodness. And God is perhaps best understood, to steal a line from Tillich, as our ultimate concern, that in which we should place our highest hopes, confidence, and trust. In Exodus, God says, by way of identification, I am that I am. And this is probably more accurately translated, I will be what I will be. I think God is better understood as a verb rather than a noun. God is not an asserted existence, but a process accomplishing itself. And God is inescapable. It is the life force that sustains, transforms, and defines all existence. The name of God is laden thanks to our religious institutions and the numerous tyrants, charlatans, and demagogues these institutions have produced with so much baggage and imagery that it's hard for us to see the intent behind the concept. The problem is not religion, but religious orthodoxy. Most moral thinkers, from Socrates to Christ to Francis of Assisi, eschewed the written word because they knew, I suspect, that once things were written down, they became, in the wrong hands, codified and used not to promote morality, but conformity, subservience, and repression. Writing freezes speech. George Steiner calls this the decay into writing. The moment the writers of the gospel set down the words of Jesus, they began to kill it, to kill the message. There is no room for prophets within religious institutions, indeed within any institutions. For as Tillich knew, all human institutions, including the church, are inherently demonic. Tribal societies persecute and silence prophets. Open societies tolerate them at their fringes. And our prophets today come not usually from the church, but from our artists, poets, writers, those who follow their inner authority. Samuel Beckett's voice is one of modernity's most authentically religious. Beckett, like the author of Ecclesiastes, was a realist. He saw the pathetic, empty monuments we spend a lifetime building to ourselves. He knew, as we read in Ecclesiastes, that nothing is certain or permanent, real or unreal, and that the secret of wisdom is detachment without withdrawal, that since death awaits us all is vanity, that we must give up on the childish notion that one is rewarded for virtue or wisdom. Those who deform faith into creeds, who use it as a litmus test for institutional fidelity, root religion in a profane rather than a sacred context. They seek, like all who worship idols, to give the world a unity and coherence it does not possess. They ossify the message, and once ossified, it can never reach an existential level, never rise to ethical freedom, to faith. The more vast the gap between professed faith and acts of faith, the more vast our delusions about our own grandeur and importance, the more intolerant, aggressive, and dangerous we become. Faith is not in conflict with reason. Faith does not conflict with scientific truth unless faith claims to express a scientific truth. Faith can neither be affirmed nor denied by scientific, historical, or philosophical truth. And here I think Sam confuses the irrational, which he sees as part of faith, with the non-rational. There is a reality that is not a product of rational deduction. It is not accounted for by strict rational discourse. There is a spiritual dimension to human existence and the universe, but this is not irrational. It is non-rational. Faith allows us to transcend what Flaubert says was our mania for conclusions, a mania he described as one of humanity's most useless and sterile drives. We are at war with Islam, Sam writes in The End of Faith. It may not serve our immediate foreign policy objectives for our political leaders to openly acknowledge this fact, but it is unambiguously so. It is not merely that we are at war with an otherwise peaceful religion that has been hijacked by extremists. We are at war with precisely the vision of life that is prescribed to all Muslims in the Quran and further elaborated in the literature of the Hadith, which recounts the sayings and teachings of the Prophet. Sam assures us that the Quran mandates such hatred, that the problem is with Islam itself. He writes that Islam, more than any other religion human beings have devised, has all the makings of a thoroughgoing cult of death. Now, after studying 600 hours of Arabic, spending 7 years of my life in the Middle East, most of them as the Middle East bureau chief for the
this is classic Hedges. he loves flexing. I took a semester abroad, or I read more books than you do. You did.
I mean, fair enough. I also do that. So
I just wanted to say how confused I was for a moment that Flaubert was writing about Armenia. Okay.
I just, since we took a break, I'm gonna just insert that I've decided that if you were to squish this debate's both sides into one person, you create Jordan Peterson.
I was just thinking that this opening, or as somebody suggested in the comments, Modernity, a poem, is very, very, very much a fit with what you said earlier about there being a certain coin that Hedges and Peterson were the two sides of, because like this is really like, in a certain way, I mean, this is like a sort of very chill leftist Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, the argument he's making that the Abrahamic religions, and by which he actually means Christianity, because if he doesn't think that Islam is halakha and Sharia don't mandate loyalty to a tribe, he's foolish. Somehow created uniquely in the history of the earth the idea of the sovereign individual, as if it hadn't come up in Neoplatonism and in Dharmic thought separately, or in Chinese thought under Confucius obligational norms, etc.
Crazy. It's like it's the kind of thing I would expect. Like, I don't know, like
it's a Jordan Peterson argument. I think I've heard Jordan Peterson make that exact argument, actually. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing you would generally expect from like highbrow conservatives, right? That they would say like this exact thing. And it's like, which is like, and it's so weird, right? Because it's like, yeah, even in Eurocentric terms, like what they didn't know about individuality in ancient Greece.
There's no individual obligation in Confucianism. There's no individual obligation in indigenous thought. I mean, like, come the fuck on.
And there was no crisis except within Christianity about what to write down and when.
Yeah. The other thing I would add that he does here that makes him similar to Peterson is he's pulling from Karl Popper's Open Society like crazy, which is an anti-communist text. It is explicitly an anti-communist text. The whole argument about we cannot tolerate the intolerant was to justify the legitimacy of Red Scares and purges of communists from governmental positions. That's what it was philosophically aimed to do. And he's trying to, like, and a lot of people try to do this. I see it all the time. Liberals try to do it, like, to use it against right wingers, which is also something Popper was trying to do, because Popper is trying to equate everyone outside of liberal modernity for him into an amass of people who were possibly intolerant and thus should be excluded from public discourse. And that means that communists and fascists are the same. Like, that's the argument. In cause Plato. Really, and it's all Plato's fault, but Plato, Hegel, Marx, and he's hiding that in his argument here. He uses the language. If you know the language, you pick it up. And I was actually sort of surprised at that, because it is that book is a very, it is a centrist right-wing book in what it's aiming to do. And I guess Hedges is thinking you can weaponize that against American fascists and evangelicals and people who he thinks are not, into his prose poem of whatever he thinks spiritual, rational, moral beings are. So yeah, I mean, I warned you guys I was going to dislike both sides. So
no, I'm actually disliking Hedges much more than I thought I would so far. But I mean, it's, again, like it's all sort of like, I don't know, it's like it's all sort of like there's this sort of gentleness to all of it, that it's like this feels a little bit like a sermon at like the utilitarian
Church of England. It's Church of England platitudes, which are fine, right? And it's honestly, if somebody is going to have a strong religious faith, by all means, right? My favorite form of Islam is Church of England Islam, where you basically just want to be a nice person and you feel responsible to a vague higher power, except you just sub in different names and it's from a different source.
It's the joke in The Simpsons where like Rod and Todd are playing the game where you like shoot at the unbelievers to make them, that to like say, and like, they're saved if you get them. And, it's like, oh, you just dinged him and made him a Unitarian. It's like, this is all kind of like acid Unitarianism. It's like, it sort of has that Unitarian gentleness to it, but it's also sort of much more obscure than that, right? Like a little bit harder to follow what the the line of thought is in some of this. It's got like, this is the kind of thing. It's like, it's sort of, again, there's something that's very chill about it, but it is also like very funny and very frustrating in much the same way as hearing Jordan Peterson try to answer the question, do you think there's a God?
Yeah, precisely. And at least with somebody like Hedges, the rest of the package is pretty palatable.
Sure.
Right. So in person, I would never try to dissuade him. It's like, you just go on doing what you're doing. I'm perfectly fine with that. We've got no quarrel, brother. But also he's not going to convince anybody intellectually, because it's just saying nice things in really nerd fancy ways.
He's kind of convinced me to be more into like henotheism than monotheism, if anything. We're talking about, tolerance and all of these great things that have come from belief in certain gods. Like, okay, can we keep the rest of them and just give them a little bit less attention, or what? Like, is it only this Abrahamic thing, or I don't know. Yeah, I'm not particularly convinced.
Well, it's weird. He also does the thing that a certain kind of liberal religious person likes to do, where idolatry means stuff I don't like.
Yeah.
He does this in his Empire of Illusions book. Like, idolatry equals porn, and I mean, seriously,
equals things I like.
Yeah. Right. So somebody said it best. I might trust Hedges' moral sentiments more than I would trust Harris's moral sentiments.
Sure.
But they're vague gust of sentiment. They're not actually articulated reasons. And so they just sound real good. I mean, I'm a poet. I know what he's doing. So
he's also remarkable for going through an entire debate in 2011, and I don't think that he said anything that's cancelable now. Right? He would actually make it through without a Twitter shitstorm following him.
I don't know. Mentioning Popper might get the Marxists mad at him.
Yeah. Did he actually mention Popper, or was it just clear cribbed from Popper?
It's all cribbed from Popper.
So you'd have to mobilize the Marxists against him. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know though. It's like, I feel like the kind of Twitter Marxists who like get really mad about shit that I feel like you might need to make it more explicit than this.
I probably could paint the target on him, but he didn't do it himself, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that like I don't know. I mean, most of those guys, in a weird way, since some of them are actually very well read, but like most of those guys are kind of headline readers, right? I mean, it's like if you just say something too deep into an article, they're not going to get mad about it, and they're not. I don't know that this would be good enough. I mean, like I do actually think that, like, honestly, cribbing stuff from the Open Society and its enemies might be what offends me most about this, but like I don't know that you could get a good Twitter shitstorm started about it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, because it is coded. I was thinking you could make the same argument with Marcuse language. You could talk about repressive tolerance if you wanted to, which he doesn't do. But it's maybe we should just let the man talk, because I think he's about to get to the part that we might agree with. So
all right, let's do it.
But I know the Quran is emphatic. about the rights of other religions to practice their own beliefs, and unequivocally condemns attacks on civilians as a violation of Islam. The Quran states that suicide of any type is an abomination. More importantly, the tactic of suicide bombing was pioneered as a weapon of choice by the Tamils, who are chiefly Hindu, in Sri Lanka long before it was adopted by Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, or Hamas. It is what you do when you do not have artillery or planes or missiles and you want to create maximum terror. I also know from my time in the Muslim world that the vast majority of the some 1 billion Muslims on the planet,
Semester abroad.
most of whom are not Arab, are moderate, detest the violence done in the name of their religion, and look at Pat Robertson or Franklin Graham, who demonize Muslims in the name of Christianity with the same horror and fear that we look at Osama bin Laden or the leaders of Hamas. The Palestinian resistance movement only took on radical Islam coloring in the 1990s, when conditions in Gaza and the West Bank deteriorated and thrust people into profound helplessness, despair, and poverty, similar conditions that are empowering the Christian right in our own country. The externalization of evil is used in Sam's book to endorse torture. He, of course, argues that the reason that requires us to waterboard detainees and the physical and moral black holes we have set up to make them disappear comes from the threat of terrorism. He quotes Alan Dershowitz, not only to reassure us that the Israelis treat Palestinians, 400 of whom have been killed in Gaza over the past few months, humanely, but to trot out this notion of a ticking time bomb. The idea that we know a terrorist has planted a large bomb in the center of a city, and we must torture him, or in the glib phrase from Sam's book, we must dust off a strappado and expose this unpleasant fellow to a Satan of bygone times. This reference to torture might be amusing if you have spent your life encased in the protective world of the university. But as someone who was captured and held for a week by Iraqi Republican Guard during the 1991 Shiite uprising in Basra, and then turned over for my final 24 hours to the Iraqi secret police, whom my captors openly expected to execute me, I find this glib talk of physical abuse difficult. Dershowitz and Harris cannot give us a legal or historical precedent where such a case as they describe actually happened. But this is not the point. The point is to endow us as a nation with a moral right to abuse others in the name of a particular version of goodness. This is done in the name of reason. It is done in the name of a false god, an idol. And this god, if you want it named, is the god of death. Or as Freud stated, thanatos, the death instinct, the impulse that works towards the annihilation of all living things, including ourselves. For once you torture, even in the name of reason, even in the name of security, you unleash sadists and killers. You consign human beings to moral oblivion. You become no better than those you oppose. The danger... The point of religion, authentic religion, is not that in the end it is about us. It is about the other, about the stranger lying beaten and robbed on the side of the road, about the poor, the outcasts, the marginalized, the sick, the destitute, about those who are being abused and beaten in cells in Guantanamo and a host of other secret locations, about what we as a society do to gays and lesbians, what we do to the 47 million Americans without health insurance, the illegal immigrants who live among us without rights or protection. Their suffering is as invisible as the suffering of the mentally ill we have relegated to heating grates or prison cells. It is about them. We have forgotten who we were meant to be, who we were created to be, because we have forgotten that we find God not in ourselves, finally, but in our care for our neighbor, in the stranger, including those outside the nation and the faith. The religious life is not designed to make you happy or safe or content. It is not designed to make you whole or complete, to free you from anxieties and fear. It is designed to save you from yourself, to make possible human community, to understand that the greatest force in life is not power or reason, but love. As Niebuhr wrote, nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime Therefore, we are saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we are saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as from our own. Therefore, we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. Thank you.
I think
Which of
Never mind about agreeing with him. I mean, I agree with what he's.
well, hold on. I was hoping we can go around and say what our favorite form of love is.
Oh,
Charizard.
Okay.
Oh, that was not. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Varn, you were saying
Forgiveness. Okay, Jesus.
the
Fine.
final form of love is forgiveness. That is some okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You go on.
No. I was just saying. I agree again. Like I said, I agree with his moral sentiments, but his justifications are a weird. I mean, I happen to know what he's invoking because I've spent too much time, dealing with this shit. It's a mixture of Reinhold Niebuhr and Philip Reef about the purpose of religion is not to make you happy. It's part of the function against the therapeutic so that we can have ordinary unhappiness a la Freud. And he's got that hidden in there too. But it's actually unfortunate because I do agree with him about the assumption that beliefs justify any of this and the true ugliness of a lot of what Harris is actually justifying. And I want to add, never recanted, for all of those who think that he's just a good secular liberal, he's never recanted his endorsements of Alan Dershowitz. He's never recanted his kind of like, let's make the Bush era war on terror palatable for Democrats. He's never recanted any of that. And so,
Woody, there's no requirement to
He's got no confessor, is what you're saying. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I mean, look, clearly there's no requirement to. I mean, my God, they
Joe Biden's president. There's no requirement to, obviously.
Yeah, Joe Biden is president.
Mr. I wrote the Patriot Act, Biden.
Yeah,
the Bankruptcy Act.
David Frum had a second act as a Trump
An anti-Trumper.
Yep, as an anti-Trumper, exactly. There's
I mean, in some ways, actually, the like Varn was saying about religion being the way that you can get away from therapeutic to mere regular unhappiness. The Harris from position seems to be like, we need to get back to the way that things were when we just had good old fashioned evil instead of this weird, ugly, plebeian, uncouth evil.
Yeah. I'd rather fight Satan than Sam Harris in the administrative state, I guess. But it's, and I think it's interesting. Just one of the things I've loved in here is meant totally ironically about the last 2 weeks is seeing like George W. Bush get all smirky about Netanyahu to remind us who these fuckers really are, since he was kind of cleaned up during the Trump administration by a bunch of liberals. It is interesting to think about this in this context because what was being justified in 2011. All right, we're no longer in the Bush era war on terror, but we are in what's going to lead up to the silent intifada in 2014. We are in with the aftermath of the Palestinian civil war of 2006 to 2008, which divided Gaza and the West Bank in the first place. We are not dealing with, for the fact, even in his invocation of Hamas, Hedges doesn't pull the power card up and be like, well, why was the Israeli government giving them money?
Right.
In 2006, why have they, kind of helped them stay in power during this time period? In fact, until very recently, in Gaza.
Haaretz published in the last couple of weeks. They republished the the thing where Netanyahu in 2019 is talking to Likud Knesset members and about the deal for like Qatar money going to Gaza, and he says if you like, this is almost an exact quote. He's like, if you don't want a Palestinian state, you shouldn't oppose money going to Hamas. This is part of our strategy.
Yeah, because you use it for justification. I mean, it's something that you kind of have to look at honestly. And what I kind of wish is, Hedges brings this up, but I guess because this is about religion, he's got to go all poetic on us. But Hedges, the power of Hedges' arguments, if you read the books by his that I think is good, war is a force that gives us meaning, war is the greatest evil. I mean, that one's a little annoying because it's very preachy, but like, and what every person needs to know about war, he does understand these conflicts and in a way beyond this prose poetry, right? Yeah. Like, I will give him that, but I kind of have to, because one of the things about this religious debate for these people is that it's actually also a proxy of debate about the war on terror. Like, right. It is.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Which is part of the uncomfortable resonance of this now that, we were kind of talking about what to watch. Tonight everybody kind of agreed not to watch anything, too timely right now, but this is sort of that aspect feels very uncomfortably timely, right? Because of that feeling of entering into a new version, right now, right? I mean, this is that we're that even above and beyond the sort of direct horrors in Israel Palestine. I mean, this is which of course dwarf the numbers that that he mentioned at the time the debate is happening. I mean, we're also teetering on the edge of a not probable, but like not negligible possibility of a war with Iran. Right. That's the like very, I saw just yesterday, right, that the U.S. officials announcing that attacks on the increasing number of U.S. troops there by Iranian proxies would be taken as if they were attacks by Iran. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe if we recreate the early 2000s.
Spy Hearst's Revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, and the numbers of that are actually quite interesting. There's 2,000 troops going on to advise the Israeli government, which, if you know anything about battalions, usually sending a battalion of like 1,000 or 2,000 is a way to get a commitment to a war if someone acts.
That's a lot of advice.
Yep.
I mean, like in some ways to be, human shields, right? I mean, that to be like that if you to be there to either not be attacked, right, or to have it be a wider conflict if they are attacked. So yeah, I mean, this thing that they're using religion as a proxy for, all of which is to say, definitely makes it feel uncomfortably timely. I mean, on the religion itself, to maybe for the last couple minutes before we go to the post game for patrons and watch however much we're watching that, I'm not sure, frankly, but in the last couple of minutes before that, to maybe turn with great relief back to abstract metaphysics, that it does, I guess it does strike me, I mean, given my own particular biases, watching Harris and then Hedges, and I'd be interested to hear what everybody else thinks about this, that, while obviously, Hedges is not, is articulating the political conclusions that I like, and to the extent that he's implicitly touching on politics, everything that Harris says, I hate, but on the abstract philosophical questions, it seems like Harris is offering a sort of frustratingly shallow engagement on a topic that at least I know what he's saying, right? Even if I wish that he was doing a better job of arguing for it, or if he was engaging with distinctions that he's missing, etc. And then like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Hedges, like, it just if that's what you mean, then I guess I don't really know what there is to talk about. Is my main thought about that? That it's like, you know, to the extent that I have any idea what you're talking about, I mean, you're just kind of saying that like this is like a, you know,
God bad. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this is like a, you know, like these are some metaphors that, you know, these are some metaphors that Chris Hedges likes or something, right? Like that this is a, you know, that like religious poems or poems that make Chris feel stuff. I don't know. So it's like I don't really know how much there is to say about that. I like that everybody went totally silent after I said I don't know how much there is to say, as if to prove the point.
I'm gonna go all Wittgenstein on us of what we cannot know, we cannot speak, or whatever.
I already said death god bad. What more do you want?
All right. Any closing thoughts before we go to the post game?
I really don't. I want people to know that I do think Hedges' moral sentiments are better than Harris's.
Sure.
I wish he made a better argument for them. Like
my last word, I'm going to lift from the chat, and they got it exactly right when someone said that Hedges is sentimental and Harris is a reptile. So pick your poison.
God. I'm just waiting for the end of the world part to come up here.
lizard.
We've all been waiting, sister.
Lizard people.
2,000 years we've been waiting.
That's right.
Or 5,000 years if you're
2,000 years.
Well, I did find Strom referred to in his super chat earlier, and it tickled a little memory, but I didn't quite remember this. And I did find the original thing that Sam Harris saying in 2015 that he would vote for Ben Carson to be president over Noam Chomsky. Which is maybe the perfect Sam Harris comment, and frankly makes me think that you know, his position on the end of the world is yes, please. So on that note, I think we're going to go to the post game. If you are a patron, then you should already have that email with the link. If you're not, there's no time like the present. Patreon.com/Ben Burgis. All of these people are going to be even more lovely and vivacious and entertaining in the post game than they have been for the last couple hours. If you can imagine such a thing, I will see you there in just a moment.